Hello, friends and family. Welcome to episode 6. Thank you for coming. This episode is particularly special to me because you guys get to meet my grandmother. We call her Nana in my family, and she is a better talker than I am. I was blown away when we sat down. She's just a natural and blows me out of the water in ability to string thoughts and words together in a cohesive manner. And I wish and hope that I will be half as sharp at half her age. This was a lot of fun. I don't really say much in this one, which is great. I kind of try to know my place and let her take the floor, and I think she does fantastic. This was an episode that I wanted to make for a little bit now. Even before I started the podcast, it was something on my mind that I think would have been awesome, and I'm just so happy that we did it. And I know that I'll get some family listening to this, so hello guys. I think you guys will enjoy Ruth doing her thing on full display. But yeah, I don't want to make a long intro. I don't want to dive too incredibly about it. I just kind of let her talk about her past, her experience, her values, her jokes, her tips and tricks and things important to her and memories she's made and people she's met. It's great. I loved it. This is a very special guest. I think it's a fun switch of how things have gone. I'm trying to implement a decent range in guests, and I think she does a great job at doing that. So without further ado, this is episode 6, Words of Wisdom with Ruth Perkins. You are listening to Unserious University. Thank you for tuning in. Enjoy your stay. Catch you later.
Boy, I don't better not have to swear into the US of A in Spanish.
I don't think you'll have to. I think you're safe now.
Yo juro bendiga a la español de los Estados Unidos de América, una nación indivisible con libertad y justicia para todos. That said, it's liberty and justice for all.
I'm surprised you still have so much Spanish down. You have more Spanish down than I do, and
Well, the last institute that I was in, the Beverly Hills Rehabilitation Institute, and a lot of the people there spoke Spanish and not very much English, so I got to practice for whatever long I was there, 6 months or something. And there are people here who speak both languages, so I get to practice with them. And it's been really good for me to get my brain cells awake a little more.
For the people who don't know you, because I'll have some of my friends listening who haven't met you before. So can you introduce yourself and
Okay.
all that fun stuff?
Okay. My name right now is Ruth Perkins. When I was born, I was Ruth Lacey, and Lacey, not the ones that took a shortcut and left the E out of the name. But I was from a youngest of a family of 8 children, and there were 4 boys and 4 girls, and 6 of them came down from Canada and settled in Los Angeles. And my brother and I were lucky enough to be born in Los Angeles, so we were already citizens. The rest of them had to go through the hoops to learn to become a citizen of the US of A. And my father was from England. My mother was from Newfoundland, that everybody calls Newfoundland. She cringed every time anybody said that because it was newfound land. She was very upset when Canada took them over because they were always a province of England. And she became a Canadian citizen without even asking to be one. So they came down on a bus with 6 kids, and almost nothing, everything was in storage up in Canada. And every once in a while she'd run across something that she really, really liked and that she remembered. And she had a place setting or two of dishes she put way up in the top of the cupboard, and they only came down for special occasions. Well, she took a trip, I think she was in her 60s, to go back home and visit her family. And when she came home, my brother was so proud of himself. He said, "Oh, and Mom, I threw away those old dishes that were up in the top of the cupboard." Oh. She was ready to kill him, but she thought better because the dishes weren't worth going to jail for. Anyway, we all spoke English, more or less. My father's English was quite different from the rest of us. And quite often my mother or my father would correct our English because it wasn't proper. And we couldn't say any cuss words in our house. And if I said heck or darn, I said, "That's not a cuss word." And my mother says, "Yes, but you're showing me what you're thinking, and you don't need to be thinking those things." So I not only had my parents as my 2 main bosses, but I had 3 sisters and 4 brothers that liked to tell me what to do, and they were all bigger than I was, so I had to listen, but I had to come up with some way of getting my way, or at least avoiding the consequences of not doing what they told me. So I learned to be a little bit sneaky, I guess is a good word, or no, let's say intuitive or inventive when it came to ways of not having to be bullied.
Yeah.
One of my sisters was babysitting me when my mother went grocery shopping, and she said as she left the house, "Don't forget to walk the dog." So my sisters took the leash and the dog and handed them to me after Mother left and said, "Walk the dog." And I said, "It's not my turn." And so she took the dog and me and the leash and put us outdoors and locked the door. Well, I was not one to just take it standing still. So when I came back in, I grabbed the nearest thing I could find, which was her brand new tennis racket, and threw it out onto the street. It's a wonder that I'm still alive to this day, because that was not a good idea. But there were others. My brother Alan used to carry me piggyback. He taught me how to play hopscotch and jacks and all of those things. But long story short, I'm very blessed to have come from a large family of really nice people who treat each other very well. If there was a rebel in the bunch, I was probably the tiniest one, and I didn't stay tiny very long. I grew up to be 5'11", and I grew so fast that I was very clumsy. Nobody wanted me on their teams because I always dropped the ball or tripped over something or whatever. So when they lined people up to choose their teams, I was either the last or the next to the last one. So if you're one of those people that ends up being the last or the next to the last one, don't worry about it, because your day will come and you will get to be the best and the fastest, either a fast thinker, a fast talker, or a fast player. It took me a lot of years to understand that I didn't have to fit in perfectly with the rest of the kids at school, because I was different, and I might as well take advantage of the being different. So I tried to remember every funny story I could think of, and finally I found a little group of smart aleck people or jokesters or whatever you want to call them, and we spent every lunchtime and break together. And when we finally graduated, the ones that were still buddies were the people in our little group. And I went to Hollywood High School, and there was one or two groups of girls. They called themselves a sorority. And if you didn't own 3 cashmere sweaters, you couldn't belong to that sorority. You had to be rich. And it really helped a lot if you were pretty. And of course, I was tall and clumsy and not very pretty and taller than a lot of my teachers. And I kind of felt like a misfit. But I didn't let that slow me down, because I knew there was another way to live my life, and it took me a lot of years to get to that point. To now, I really, really appreciate family, and I'm so lucky to have been born into the family that I was born into, because we get together 3 times a year, Thanksgiving, Christmas, and Easter, at my niece's house, and everybody brings food. She has a pool and a jacuzzi and a half of basketball court by the garage, and then some people play volleyball in the front yard. I used to, but I kind of got laughed off of that team when I kept falling down in the gopher holes in the front lawn. Not really into the gopher holes, but you know what I mean. So anyway, this is my sermon on family. If you treat them well, most generally they will treat you well. You just need to recognize which are the ones that you want to hang out with and which are the ones you just need to be polite with. And for me, fortunately, they're all people I love to hang out with. So I don't know if this is a common knowledge thing, but it turns out that people are a lot like puppy dogs in the fact that if you treat them kindly, they most generally will not bite you. You have to kind of take a step back and try to evaluate what the person is, and if something is said that is totally off the wall and not truth in any way whatsoever, someone taught me to say, "Oh, that's very interesting." And it fits a lot of gaps in the conversation.
I've learned to say the same
I've
thing.
never heard of that before. Oh my, where did you find that out? And that puts them on the spot, which you have to be careful with. And another little handy hint for trying to make it through this crazy world is you watch a person's face when you're talking to them, and if you hit a bad chord somewhere or some subject that's not a good one to talk about, there'll be a change in their facial features. A smile might slowly fade into a frown, and you know you're stepping on the wrong people's toes, or your wrong subject or something. So you gently change the subject and ask the other person questions that aren't threatening. Like the threatening one would be, where do you work and how much money do you make? Or when was the last time you cheated on your wife? Now that's not a good question to ask anyone either. So you just have to feel your way through and try to read the people that are around you, and try not to upset too many people at the same time. But if they have a good sense of humor and you figure it's safe, then it's okay to joke around. But don't criticize people's mothers. Don't criticize their clothes or their cars or the place where they live. So try to think of something nice to say to people. and not being, what is that big word, sycophant. And the meaning of that word is kissing someone's behind just to make points. I don't care for that kind of maneuver or operation, because you can be kind to people and not lie to them, but ask them questions like, where were you born? Or if you had a choice, you could live anywhere in the world, where would that be? And there are a lot of little handy hints for conversation starters. And I've been put in a position recently. Oh, by the way, I didn't mention I'm 93 years old and still reasonably sane. At least that's what I've been told. They're just trying not to hurt my feelings. But anyway, I read an article years ago on how to remember, especially how to remember names. And I met someone just this evening in the dining room here who said his name was Mervyn. And I said, well, that's an easy one to remember because you own so many department stores. And he looked at me like, what? So it worked for me, but it didn't work for him. And because my name is Ruth, I tell people, if you can't remember a name, just bark at me. Say, Ruth, 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 and they'll remember it that way. But there's a lady named Jill, and I asked her, how is Jack? And she said, I've heard that before. She wasn't putting me down, I don't think. She was just tired of hearing it. But there are a lot of Bobs around here, and a lot of Bobs bobbing around here. And there's a whole bunch of Marys and one lady whose name was Joyce. In order to remember her name, when I see her, I say rejoice. And she likes that, so I'm going to stay with it until I forget it. And there's no telling when that's going to happen. But there's, Mary Ann and Shirley. She's Shirley, goodness and mercy shall follow you all the days of your life. So I always use that for her name. And it just goes on and on. But when you make something that's kind of difficult, make it easier, then you'll be happy and the other people will be impressed that you remembered their name. And I had a wonderful lady friend for a number of years who would never say, I can't remember. She always said, I'll think of it in a minute. And then she explained, she said, if I say I can't remember, then my brain throws it away. But if I say I'll think of it in a minute, my brain keeps working on it when I change the subject. And sure enough, it will come back to me. Sometimes it'll be in a minute, sometimes hours, or sometimes the next day. But I don't know if it's logical, but it seemed logical to me. So if it works for me, I believe it, and I keep it, and I use it. Another thing that I like to use, and I've told many people this, is raising kids, especially with grandkids. When my youngest grandkid in California asked me, Nana, am I your favorite grandson? And I had to think fast. And I said, yes, you are my very favorite 7-year-old grandson, and your brother is my favorite 10-year-old grandson, and your other brother is 13 years old, my favorite 13-year-old grandson. And I still try to remember to write down their ages, and when I send a card to them, it's, you are my favorite 20-year-old grandson or 19-year-old grandson. But even if I get the name wrong, they humor me and they laugh, so that makes us all happy. So, and now I have great grandsons, and I told them they're not run of the mill everyday grandsons. They are great grandsons. And what does that make me? I am a great grandmother, and don't you forget it. So we have a lot of fun, do a lot of fun things. Um, Handy hints that I've discovered have become very handy in my old age is if you're getting up out of a chair and you are a little bit decrepit around the edges, you push against whatever you're sitting on, the couch or a big chair, you push against that with the calves of your legs in order to push yourself forward and get your weight centered over your feet. And then it's easier to get up. You don't have to use your arms as much. And then a physical therapist gave me a handy hint, and that was when you're standing up or getting ready to stand up, don't push down on your arms because I use a walker. Push down on the floor and use your arms to balance yourself. It's much easier to do it that way. And so I've had lots of handy hints over the years, and sometimes I've had them at a time where they've been really helpful, and other times when not so much, but I enjoy talking to people and learning new things. And one of my favorite subjects is talking to people who were born in a different country or speak a different language, and their families and their heritages, and their holidays are very interesting. So I'm a travelogue junkie. I watch everything I can find about different places in the world, because this is an interesting world and a beautiful place if you look for it. I love nature. I used to love hiking, but it's hard to do that with a walker, I've discovered. I tried walking some of the trails in Yosemite Valley, but when I got too far away from the car and the people in the parking lot, I discovered I had gone farther than my capability would handle. So I sat down for a little bit, and one hiker went by and didn't ask me if I was okay or if I needed help. He said, "Well, look at you." So then I felt validated. I was able to walk that far. Even if I couldn't make my way back, I was able to walk that far. And thank goodness my family was ready to go and look for me, and I was glad that I was nice to them, because you never know. Yeah. Maybe that's why they kept taking me out in the forest. There were bears and lions and tigers and snakes and bugs, oh my, everywhere you went. And I don't care for bugs and snails and snakes and all of those things. And I don't care to have any close contact with any of those animals. I have had a snake that came in the house, and I don't want to even touch him, but he was just lying there on the floor, and I was going to be brave and pick him up. Well, he was faster than I was, and he ran under my heater, and I tried scaring him out by banging on the heater. That just made him hide a little farther back. And I called a neighbor, and he said, "Well, what do you want me to do?" And he said, "You want me to come and get it?" I said, "Well, that's kind of why I called you." And so he came up with his big, heavy gloves, and I grabbed the trash can from the kitchen, and he had a piece of PVC pipe, and it was about 5 feet long, maybe only 4. Anyway, he had the cord or little rope that they put on blinds so you can open and close the blinds in your windows. He had a length of that, and he put that in the PVC pipe. It was folded over, and at the end of the PC of that pipe, the PVC pipe, at the end of that pipe, there came out a loop, and he made the loop the size he wanted. And when the snake brought its head out, he quickly looped that around the snake's head and pulled the cord, so the snake was trapped in the PVC pipe. And I was ready with the trash can. He put it in there, and I didn't realize that a snake can rise up. He was almost out of that trash can when I went flying through the front door. He said, "What do you want me to do with the snake?" And I said, "You see that field across the street? I want you to go across the street and throw that snake as far as you can, and don't show me where." But that's how much I love being around snakes. And we did have rattlesnakes where I lived, so fortunately I never had one in the house. Let's see.
With a good majority of the people who listen or follow along to this being around my age, they'll probably be interested in maybe some of the events that you've gotten to live through or seen yourself versus what they just read about, or maybe
Well, one of them involved one of my brothers. I was the only girl in the neighborhood, so if I wanted to hang out with anybody, it was my brother and his friends. And we were taking a hike from Hermosa Beach to Palos Verdes in California. And we were walking along this ledge, and I slipped and started to fall down the cliff, and there was rocks and the surf down at the bottom. I managed to grab a good-sized bush, and I was hanging on for dear life, and I screamed, and my brother came and got me and pulled me back up to safety. And then for years later, anytime I ticked him off, he would say, "I never should have saved you. I never should have saved you." I never lived that down. But I kind of got even with him when he climbed up a eucalyptus tree down by the railroad tracks, and the branch that he used to step on before he got up one step higher broke just as he stepped off of it. So he was up there without a place to put his feet to come down. Well, I ran home and got my brother, who was 6'4", to come up and rescue this brother and bring him down out of the tree. And so I was able to say to him, "If it weren't for me, you could still be hanging in that tree." They're just little subtle ways you can do things. And people get the message without getting too angry, I think. That's how I learned to run fast, too. So, let's see, I went to high school, graduated, went to business college in Los Angeles and got a good job at an insurance company or an agency in Los Angeles. And I decided to go and work part-time and go to the business college part-time. So I did my homework on the bus to get to work, and then I worked my 4 hours, and they had a special deal where I could work 4 hours at the business school and it would pay my tuition. So my expenses weren't too high. I did a lot of babysitting and extra jobs. My brother had a push mower and a rake and a couple of shovels, so he did the neighborhood gardening on the weekends, and then I got to be his head flunky. Come to think of it, I was his only flunky, but I got the happy jobs of picking up all the stuff that he cut off the branches and the grass that he cut, because they didn't have bags on mowers way back in the olden days before Well, I guess we did have telephones in those days.
How
That
old
was
were you during this?
I was born in 1931. I was 10 years old when World War II broke out. And that's a whole nother story, but I'll make it as quick as possible. But I um, and learned a lot in the business school and went on to work for the same insurance agency I had worked for before and learned how to do shorthand and all those things. We didn't have computers. We didn't have cell phones. Um, we had telephones, and most people had more than one party. That means one family or one telephone number was a party line, and not the kind of party you're thinking of now. Anyway, we were on the party line with 4 other families, and one family had several teenagers in their house, and it was so difficult to be able to use the phone. It would probably be quicker to run down to the store and grab something because they would deliver, but it would take quite a long time to get whatever you needed. But life was different then, and our little town in Hermosa Beach was not threatened by World War II, so they were very kind to all of the soldiers that moved into town. And one of my older sisters would go down the street where the stores were and pick up 1 or 2 or 3 servicemen and bring them home for Sunday dinner, because they were pushing that big time on the radio that let's take good care of our troops. And she brought one young man home, and I was 15 years old, and he was a pretty nice looking guy, and he took me to the movies, and we went on a couple of picnics and what have you. And as 15-year-old girls are, we're thinking, oh, this is so wonderful and what have you. Well, I guess he spent about 3 or 4 weekends with our family, and then we wrote letters back and forth. And when last letter I got from him was he was heading home. He was going to be done with his time in the service. And then in the next mail delivery came the invitation to his wedding to his longtime sweetheart. Talk about a broken-hearted 15-year-old kid, I tell you. The sun's never going to shine again. You'll never be able to breathe again. Life is over. I just can't handle all this grief. But I got over it. So my sister found some sailors that were dressed in a different kind of uniform, and she stopped them, and they were from New Zealand, and there were 8 of them. And she called my mother from the corner drugstore, because we didn't have cell phones, and said, Mama, I'm going to bring home some New Zealand sailors for tea. Would that be all right? And she said, okay, but she didn't say how many. So they came, and they all had a wonderful time. And then the following Saturday, we knew they were going to be shipping out. So my mother and I spent Friday afternoon, Friday evening, and Saturday morning baking cookies for them to take back to the ship. And they were so excited. I don't know if the cookies ever made it back to the ship, but at least there were 8 happy sailors from New Zealand that day. But everybody that could volunteer to help with anything would go out and volunteer, and they turned I was living in Hollywood at the time, they turned the Hollywood Roosevelt Hotel into the Hollywood Guild Canteen, not the famous Hollywood Canteen, but I used to go spend Saturday there, and I think I was probably 13 or 14, and those guys, the servicemen that were there, taught me how to make beds so you could bounce a quarter off of the bed when you were through making the bed. And the worst job was emptying dirty ashtrays. And then the cook took me into the kitchen and sat me down with a bunch of little knives to peel potatoes and 2 or 3 50-pound bags of potatoes. And he said, I want these all ready to cook at 4 o'clock this afternoon. And this was about 10 or 11 in the morning. And I said, well, I'll try it. I don't know if I can do it. Well, the first serviceman that came by and said, what have they done to you? Those guys in the kitchen, they think they're really funny, don't they? Like, give me one of those peelers. I'll help you with the potatoes. And before I knew it, I had 4 guys sitting there with me who really knew how to peel potatoes much better than I did. And we had them all ready by 3 in the afternoon. And they all became my friends. And I told my neighbor who had taken me there one day, I said, I don't think this is what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm just wasting my time. And she said, why? And I said, because these guys just all tease me all the time. And she said, are you kidding? You're taking the place of the little sister that they left at home. And they love to have somebody to tease. So I became the victim. But it was fun, and I felt like I was doing something constructive. But neighbors helped neighbors, and everybody wrote letters to people, sometimes people they didn't even know, or sometimes it was relatives. But I had a brother in the army that landed in Normandy, France in a terrible rainstorm, and he said, when you got off the ship and off the little boat that took you ashore, you tried to walk, and it wasn't a sandy beach, it was mud, and it came up to the top and sometimes over and into your boots, and you still had to keep going. But he had quite a time of it in France and came back all safe and sound. The next brother had a heart murmur problem, and he was 4F. He couldn't be in the service, but he went around with a group that entertained the servicemen at different bases. And the next one down the line joined the Army Air Corps. It was before it was a separate entity. The Air Force was not part of its own force, but it was part of the Army. And he wanted to be a pilot, but his eyesight wasn't good enough. He wanted to be a navigator, but his math wasn't good enough. So he ended up in the control tower at the port there in the Philippines in Luzon. And the next one, the youngest one of my brothers, that was 3 years older than myself, he ended up being in the Marine Corps in the Korean War and was in an invasion into a place called the Incheon Reservoir, where he received a bullet in his leg that I guess went to the grave with him.
Oh my gosh.
But they tried everything to try to figure out how to get the bullet out without making him have problems with his leg and having trouble walking and all of that. So anyway, my father did what was called a victory garden. We were raising food for ourselves and to share with other people because we couldn't get all of the food that we normally were getting. That was going to the troops and to the people that were in bad shape because of the war. And so we grew all kinds of beans and peas and lettuce and tomatoes. And I think one of my favorite things was the fresh peas. We ate those raw, my brother and I, much to my mother's chagrin. But we had pretty much everything we would want. And we had coupons where my family was vegetarian, so they would take the coupons that they got to buy meat, and they would trade it to other people to buy milk and eggs and cheese. So we would have a protein source. And my mother was pretty resourceful when it came to making a good meal out of not a lot of expense. So, and one of my sister's husband was an air raid warden, and if they had an air raid warning, he would go out and make people turn off lights. And they painted the top half of the headlights on the cars, they painted the top half black so it couldn't be seen from the air. And we turned on the burners on our kitchen stove and sat around in the dining area of the kitchen where we could have that much light to see each other. And we had flashlights to find our way around the house. And then they would let off the sirens, and we could hear this sound off in the distance that the air raid was over and no problem. But when the war was first starting, my sister's husband was a policeman in Hermosa Beach, and his boss was drafted, so he became the police chief for Hermosa Beach, and they received 4 Italian prisoners of war to put in their jail because they ran out of places to keep them locked up, and they didn't figure they were any kind of a threat. They were in the Italian army, whether they wanted to be or not. And so the policeman in Hermosa Beach discovered that one of the guys was a talented artist, and they went out and bought artist materials for him, so he would paint portraits of the guys and pictures that he thought they would like, and did that. And then when they discovered these guys were no threat whatsoever, they'd take them down to the beach. Three or four policemen. It was a low crime area, and they'd take the guys down to the beach, and they'd all play volleyball and go swimming and all of that. It was really a rough war for them.
Not your average POW experience.
No,
during the time.
Not at all. But I was not understanding what the war was all about, and they took the Japanese grocery store owners and employees, they took them off and locked them up. I would imagine probably up at Manzanar in the San Joaquin Valley. And I didn't discover until I got really, really old that Manzana is an apple and Manzanar is an apple orchard. And that was where they built this concentration camp. And the Japanese Americans had pretty much freedom. It was not an ideal place because they had snow and cold winds and all of that, but they dug the ground and planted their trees and their apples and their cold weather fruit that like cherries and pears and peaches and those things, and they raised chickens, and so they pretty much had a nice life there. It's not where they wanted to be, but it was safe and they were well taken care of. On one Christmas, and I don't know if I remember correctly, but I think it was not too much past, was the year of the actual breakout of the war, which would have been 1941, and Christmas would be a couple of weeks later, or more or less. And my brother-in-law called the house and he said, "Come on down to the Hermosa Beach Pier and just stand off and wait and watch." And we did, and there were a few other people on the beach watching, and it was not very warm there, but very shortly after we got there, an airplane came over, and they had on board what they called a depth charge. It would go down deep and then explode. So the plane came over and they dropped this depth charge that was be like a metal 55-gallon drum with the handle coming out of the side of it, and they dropped those off the planes into the water. And when they got to a certain point, probably close to the bottom, if that handle thing hit anything, it would explode. Well, they came over first time and just clear water, which would be white because of the foam of disturbing the water. The first two landings or droppings were looked like nice clean water, and the third time they came over, when the water came up, it was black, and it meant that they had hit a submarine with that depth charge. And many, many, many years later, a friend of mine who was living down south of Long Beach, between Long Beach and San Diego, she said they dropped one there. They sunk one there, and somebody else, I guess I read it in the history part of the ship, was called the Star of India, and I think it's still there as a little museum thing in San Diego. They had a newspaper article cut out that showed the time and place of these three sinkings of Japanese submarines. But if the Japs had only known how helpless we were, we would all be speaking Japanese today. But they could have walked right in and taken over everything. We had no defense whatsoever. I mean, they thought they had some, but not what they needed. So soon after that, they started digging holes in the ground and putting in anti-aircraft. And there were some areas that were fenced off that you couldn't go in there, and by order of the U.S. government. And we discovered they were anti-aircraft. I've forgotten what they called them, but they were underground, and they would electronically open up, and they could focus where the enemy was coming in, and they could have done a really good job of protecting things, but nobody even began to imagine that we were going to be attacked here on our soil.
I know when we visited San Francisco, they have some anti-aircraft, like barracks and leftover buildings for similar reasons, I presume.
Yeah. But I've seen a lot of interesting things in my lifetime. And if you ever do much traveling, I would recommend going to the east coast of Newfoundland or Newfoundland. That's where the western end of the intercontinental telephone lines were laid. And the first time they tried it, they towed a huge cable thing from France and the other side from the U.S., and they were supposed to meet up in the middle of the ocean. Well, they missed each other. I don't remember by how many feet, but it wasn't really too bad, but they couldn't do anything to change it. So the next time they tried, they hit it right on, and they connected the cable in the middle of the ocean, so they had telephone communication from, I can't remember the little town where it was in Newfoundland, but it's very famous. And some of the places that they had along the coast where they would have dugouts in the ground and a big mound that came over the top of the dugout, and there were bunk beds in there, and some people that were on surveillance, in other words, watching for any problems. They lived in there like a week at a time or 2 or 3 days at a time, and they always had somebody waiting and watching because they were sure that the planes were going to come from Germany and come over and bomb Canada. And the next step would have been the U.S. And then when they came through and did do some of that many years later in New York, when they flew those planes into the high-rise buildings, there were people some that we met who lost relatives in those bombings, and some family were on vacation up there and they couldn't get a hold of their son, and they were just so devastated. And the second or third day we were there, they got a phone call that he was okay. But it was kind of a little side thing, but when we arrived, the people that had been stopped, they couldn't fly back home. They were in the airport in a small town, and I can't remember the name of it, but the people of the town where they were landed came out with warm clothes and blankets and food and invited them into their homes to stay with them. And the veterinarians even came out and took their animals, their pets that were in the plane, and took care of them all. And when they finally could fly back home, somebody was asking, what do we do with the clothing and the blankets that you people so generously gave us? And they said, oh no, we don't expect those back. You just take them because that's why we gave them, is for you to have them, and you can give them to somebody else when you get home. But it was quite an experience to see all of that and hear that history. And I actually have a book at home. It's called The Day the World Stood Still. And it's all about that experience of being there and living through the bombings that were going on in their own hometowns. They couldn't get a hold of family members and relatives and know what was going on. But
and you said this is in which town?
Pardon?
You said this was in which town?
I can't remember the name of the town. It's in Australia. I want to say, no, I'll have to find the book and get back to you, I guess. But the name of the book is The Day the World Stood Still. And it's worth a read if you're into that sort of thing.
I think I can find the name of the town for you.
You probably can. But everywhere we went on our trip in Canada was a learning experience to see how well the people did. There was one town that had 2-story buildings on it, and on the second story, they would have a door to the outside, but no staircase. And the local guys used to jokingly call it, that was the mother-in-law doors to go in and out of the house. But actually what it was is they got so much snow up where they are that they didn't need a staircase, because the doors and the windows on the second story were now ground level after it snowed for a while.
Jeez.
And it was icy for most of the winter. And I don't recommend that, but it's been an interesting time. I've enjoyed meeting a lot of people and hearing their stories, and sometimes, my husband used to say, I never let the truth stand in the way of a good story. And there are a lot of people like that out there too. So I don't think I'm one of them, but you may find out if you do enough digging that I'm just an old lady who is lucky to remember her name some days. But I'm
Could you
glad.
could you speak a little on how you met my grandpa, or Don, who I never met?
Your grandpa and I worked at the same company, Collins Radio Company in Burbank, California. And I just went there to have a job. And I ended up in what they called the tool crib. and it was all fenced off and full of shelves and little drawers and bins and all kinds of things. And I wasn't familiar with any of those kinds of things. I knew a little bit about tools from my father and my brothers, but nothing like that. And I had a desk there, and when they checked tools out or checked them back in, they had to sign in and sign out. And he was best friends with my boss. So when I went out either to the patio and have lunch or went to a local restaurant, he would take over my chair. And first thing those jokers did was put a rubber snake in my drawer when I would reach in to get a pen or a pencil. And then a group of them would stand way off where they could see me and I wouldn't notice them. And somebody would call me on the phone and then they'd tell me they wanted a special tool. Now, you're going to have to write this down. And they knew I would put my hand in my desk to find a pen. And when I screamed, they were all over in the corner laughing and laughing and laughing. And then they would call me with things like, I want a DC battery number 640. There's no such thing as a direct current battery. And every time they would come up with like a left-handed monkey wrench, which I've never seen one. But so I would take the kidding and let them tease me because it made them happy and there's nothing I could do to stop it. So now that I've gotten really, really old, my word for the year I discovered when I sold it, my house I'd lived in forever. That year was going to be joy. And I like that word so much I've kept it, and it's been probably 12 years, maybe not that long. But that's my word for the year, and then my goal for each day is to make at least one person laugh or smile, and I don't care if they're laughing at me or with me, but it makes me feel good to make other people feel good. So those are two fun things that I do, and if I tell myself it's a good morning, or I tell other people good morning long enough, I begin to believe it. And it makes me feel like it is a good morning after all. And I've gotten to the place with my lack of capability of moving around very well. I'm grateful every morning that I'm still breathing in and breathing out. So if you get to that point where that's all you have to be grateful for it, enjoy it. And there are too many grumpy old ladies in this world and grumpy old guys. I sat down to have lunch in the dining room here, and the lady sitting there, I said, "How are you today?" And she put her head in her hands and she said, "I wish I was dead." And I'm thinking to myself, well, there's a nice conversation starter. And there are a lot of people who are missing limbs, a lot of people who are truly grumpy, and there are other people that are not only missing limbs, but they're on oxygen, and they're having kidney problems and all kinds of things, and they're cheerful, nice, kind people, and they're making the most of their circumstances, and people like to be around them. And I told the manager of the place where I'm now living for senior citizens, I said I had a complaint, and he looked really serious, and he asked me what was that. And I said, well, it's really hard to be a grumpy old lady when everybody treats me so well. And so he's been my buddy since then.
Managers love a good review.
Pardon?
Managers love a good review.
Yes, they do. Well, even the employees too. But I think.
Can I reel you back to your story with Dawn?
With Dawn?
Yeah.
Oh yes. Okay. He, my husband was into cars, and especially old cars. And he used to go to car shows and come back and talk about the cars and what have you. Well, my brother, that was 3 years older than myself, the one that used to tease me half to death, used to go to car shows, but he didn't want to take his little sister with him. He had a girlfriend he took with him. And so I always wanted to go to a car show. Well, Don decided he would invite me to go to the car show. And who do we run into? First thing is my brother and his girlfriend. But we both agreed that we were just going to be friends. Because I had been in a bad relationship and he had been in one, and we just wanted somebody to hang out with and spend time with. And lo and behold, after hanging out together for a while, we began to care a little bit more for each other than just being friends. Although we stayed friends, most of our marriage, we had some tough moments, some rough times, and what have you. But I decided that it's okay to fight as long as you fight fair. And the best part about fighting with your mate or your friend or your buddy is that making up is the best part of fighting. Mm-hmm. You get flowers, you get candies, you get hugs, you get kisses. I'll let you imagine the rest of it. Oh, you can cut that out if you want. Sorry, it just slipped out.
Cut out the best part? I think not.
Oh, dear. Now, didn't you need a censor for this?
Yeah, and to think Mom told me that I had to be the one to behave when I told her I was doing this.
So, well, I have an acute case of hoof-in-mouth disease. It's not foot-in-mouth because jackasses don't have feet. They have hooves. So I have to say it like it is. And too many times I open my mouth and something will come out before I can close my mouth again. But if it makes people laugh, then oh well. They already know I'm a crazy old lady, and I'm happy that way. So I'll probably continue to be a crazy old lady. But back to my husband, Don. He liked to travel and go places, and we didn't have much money. Our first camping trip, we borrowed a tent from my husband's uncle, and we went to Lake Mojave in California. That's the hottest blinking place I'd ever been to. It was 120 degrees, and we went with another couple, and the guys had to hold the tent posts with rags in their hands because they couldn't touch the tent poles. They were metal and they were so blinking hot they would burn your hands. And the tent was old and it had wax on it to keep it waterproof because it was really, really old. And it melted the wax that they'd put on it to keep it waterproof. And when it kind of warmed up a little bit, it looked like a brand new tent. All the wax had gone back to where it came from. And we only stayed there, I guess, 1 or 2 nights. And in the middle of the day, our friends had a motorboat. And when we would get too warm, we'd all jump in the motorboat and go back and forth on Lake Mojave. And when we got too warm, we would get in the water and then get back in the boat. And he'd go as fast as he could. And that was our air conditioning. And we got to see up close and personal, and I don't think it was the first time they had seen people, but there were big lizards. They're called chuckawallas, and they live in the cliffs around that area, and they're like a small alligator.
Oh wow!
Only they're sand colored, and they eat small mammals and little critters like that. And I bet they probably could eat some of the fish around there too. But when they're upset, they puff up their cheeks in their throat and making themselves look scary so you'll go away. We were so traumatized. But well, my husband liked to travel, and we finally got enough money together that we bought a small camping trailer, no bathroom in it, but it was a small camping trailer. And oh, one of the things I thank the Lord for every day is indoor bathrooms. Because if you've ever camped in a trailer or a tent and there's no toilet in there, you have to get up in the middle of the night. You go out, walk to the little outhouse that smells terrible and oftentimes has a lot of flies in the summertime, but what do you do? Anyway, you're sitting in there in the dark with your flashlight and you hear the crunching of leaves outside the wooden outhouse. And you wait and you say hello and nobody answers. You say hello again and nobody answers. And still the crushing of the leaves was going on around the little outhouse. And thankfully it was made of fairly sturdy wood. But I had a choice. I was either going to sit there and freeze my tush off, or I was going to take my flashlight and make a run for it. Well, I finally got to where I didn't hear any more crunching, and I did make it out of there safely, but we tried to avoid outhouses with no lights and no protection. But we had lots of fun times up and down the coast of California, and we made it up back and forth to Canada, in the western part of Canada, because that's where my family was from. And we were going to make it up to Alaska, but we ran into some problems financially and couldn't afford that trip. But we were going to do the Alcan Highway, which is American-Canadian super highway. But we did make our trip from California to North Carolina to visit my sister-in-law, and that was a very fun trip. But we saw most of the US of A, and I wouldn't trade that for anything. And as far as financing is concerned, we took our little Volvo. It was like a fastback, and we had one child at the time, so we took part of a playpen and lashed it to the front of the back seat, and that was his playpen and his crib. He could sleep in there when we were traveling, and we would stop every day and buy fast food or go to a local restaurant and buy food to go, park at the local park, and we had blankets with us. My husband would sleep in the international travel hall that we had, and I would play outside. We had a big blow-up plastic ball, and I would play outside with the little guy, keep trying to get as much energy out of him before we got him back in the car. And at night we'd try to wear him out before we got to the motel, because it's in the car, drive, and out of the car and eat, and then back in the car and drive. And by the time we got to the motel, guess who's jumping off the walls and off the beds and everything else? So we had to try to wear him out. And he enjoyed the traveling too. And we met a lot of interesting people, and it was so fun. We drove into a gas station and filled up the International, and the owner said, "Where are you folks going to stay tonight?" And we said, "Well, we're looking for a motel." He said, "Well, there isn't one for quite a few hours, and it's getting dark." He said, "I've got an extension cord. I will plug in electricity for you for your trailer, and I'll leave the restroom door unlocked. So you can park right here, and when I come in the morning, I can take the cord out and do whatever." And he said, "If you'd want to leave really early, put the cord over here and take care of that." But, people were just so kind. And I don't know if they still are that way, but we were treated very well on the road. And
I
we
think
didn't.
some people are still kind, but
Yes.
I think I don't know. It seems less common,
Yes.
and it seems like people back then were more unified. They
Mm-hmm.
seemed to kind of be on the same page of wanting to help their community.
Yeah, it's just like that old geezer. Old geyser told us, geezer, um, ain't you got no learning, kid? You don't treat nobody like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had people that looked like they might be coming after me and going to take my walker away from me and beat me up and steal my purse or whatever. And lo and behold, they're running up to me and opening a door for me. And some of the roughest looking people that you wouldn't expect to be polite and watching out for you would be the ones that would be there first to open the door for you. And I found more kind people since I started using a walker and occasionally a wheelchair, that there's so many nice people out there. It's just a lot of people don't want to extend themselves because nobody trusts them and they don't trust anybody else.
Yeah.
And it's sad.
Yeah. My hope is to get back to that a little more. I don't know what it will take, because it feels like such a big place.
I think what's going on in California right now with all the wildfires and what they had going on in Hawaii, the people are stepping up and helping each other out.
Mm-hmm.
There are more people that are willing to help and give than there are people who come in and steal in those situations. And there isn't punishment tough enough to punish the people who set those fires intentionally. I have no patience for that sort of thing.
Yeah. This has been a pretty bad one lately.
Yeah. So I didn't understand when my mother told us not to play with matches until the same brother, the one that was 3 years younger than me, he decided that he was going to burn the ants that were down in the ground in the field across the street. And he put a little bit of something flammable in the hole and dropped a match in there, and there's dry grass all around there. And it caught on fire and scared everybody. His buddies thought it was going to be such a cool thing. But luckily, everybody had enough sense to start pushing dirt down and closing up the hole so the fire would go out. But one of the neighbors said, yeah, there was a little fire over there in the field the other day. We haven't figured out who did it. And I think he knew.
Some people got to learn the hard way.
Yeah. Well, if you haven't seen it happen,
then you don't know.
But there's a thing about life in general. If you tell people that you appreciate them, you say something good, then it changes their countenance to a certain extent. And the Los Angeles Police Department had a saying, or has a saying, if you see something, say something. Well, I've changed that a little bit, and my saying is, if you see something good, say something good. And when I was in a restaurant and I had been having breakfast with friends and I was leaving, there was a lady that came in that was dressed beautifully, and she was a fairly pretty lady. On top of that, she was ahead of me paying her bill, and when she turned to walk away, I said, you look absolutely beautiful this morning. And her eyes started to fill with tears, and she said, you have no idea how much I needed that today. And I didn't say it for any particular reason other than I saw something good and I said something good. And I'm not trying to pat myself on the back, but that was a phenomenon that I hadn't really recognized before that moment. And it doesn't cost us anything to say thank you or please or I enjoyed that or whatever. And little kids in the same restaurant on a different day were having breakfast with their parents. And when I got up to leave, I turned to the kids and spoke loudly enough for the parents to hear. It was a pleasure having breakfast next to you. You acted like real grown-ups. You didn't fight with each other. You didn't cry and fuss about anything. And you didn't spill food all over the place. You weren't too loud. And you acted like real grown-ups. And their parents, of course, I said it loud enough for the parents to hear. Their parents were just as happy as they could be. So I made the kids happy, I made the parents happy, and I made me happy.
A net win.
So I'm probably just selfish. Who knows?
One thing that I have noticed Tom do before, and for people who don't know, Tom is her son and my uncle, is if we have a good waiter, he will ask for the manager, and then he will tell the manager that how good the waiter was, so that not only does the waiter get praise, but they get praise from their boss.
Yes.
And I've seen him do that before, and I haven't done it in years because I had forgotten about it, but this conversation had reminded me that I used to do it every so often because I had seen him do that.
Yes.
And I loved that.
And I've done
approach.
That in shops where I've been looking for clothes or looking for a particular item, especially in stores that I frequent. I'll say something to the manager about, you have a real gem in your department here.
Yeah.
And it doesn't take very long to do that. It doesn't take much to say something nice. And I was walking in by myself with my walker to the same restaurant to have breakfast with my friends. And there was a man sleeping on a metal box that was probably 3 feet off the ground and long enough for him to lie on it with his bedroll and his all his earthly belongings, which wasn't much. And as I got alongside him, as I got closer to him, I thought, oh, I'm so vulnerable and there's nobody else around. And I've got a walker and I'm very, very weak as far as trying to defend myself. And so I just kind of held my breath as I walked past him. And it's just as I walked past him, he jumped up and ran ahead of me. And when I got to the door, he opened the door for me. And I said, oh, in my mind, I was saying to me, oh, I am so judgmental. Why didn't I see that he was a real person with real needs? And he jumped up to be kind to me when I was thinking nothing but bad thoughts about him. Mm-hmm. And you never know. But since I've had a walker, I've found very many, many, many kind people. Even little kids love to open the door for people.
Yeah.
But you have to be aware of the opportunities. And I have a little niece, or she's not so little anymore. She's a teenager, but when she was about 5 years old, she used to walk alongside me with my walker, and she was trying to help me steer it. It was all I could do to still stand up. But I had to bite my tongue and thank her very much for making sure I didn't fall down. But I don't know. I started looking back at songs way back in the olden days when my older brothers and sisters were playing the old songs of Bing Crosby and Frank Sinatra and some of the other ones. And there was a song called Accentuate accentuate the positive and eliminate the negative, and don't mess with Mr. In Between. And it's all this thing of positive thinking, and there are people who say, oh, that's a bunch of baloney. I'm not going to go around be nice to people just to make them feel good. But you're actually helping yourself see something good, and you're helping the other person receive something good. And you never know what just saying a few words will do. When my husband was very, very ill and close to dying, he was in and out of the hospital a whole lot, and I ran into a young woman whose husband was out at Edwards Air Force Base in the service. And she was pushing this little boy around the hospital halls, and I said, oh, are you showing him around the place? And she looked at me for a minute, and she said, well, he was having a bad day. And then the next time I saw her was right before Thanksgiving, and she was in the ladies' room, and she was crying. And I said, what's wrong? And she said, the doctors just told me to take my son home and celebrate Christmas because he wasn't going to be here for Christmas. And then she just cried and cried and cried and cried. And all I did was hug her. And I was just somebody who listened to her. I couldn't change her circumstances. I couldn't do anything but just try to hug her and sympathize with her as best I could. But I thought, oh my gosh, what a horrible thing that she's going through. And when my husband was very near dying, I pulled out of the hospital parking lot late at night, it was 9:30 or 10, to drive home, and I almost pulled out in front of a speeding car. And luckily, I reacted in time, and the driver did too, and he didn't hit me. But I realized here I was, full of emotions and not watching the traffic the way I should be. And so now when I drive by hospitals and schools, or when I could still drive before I became such an old lady, I would try to be extra careful. But you don't realize those things unless you've lived through some of them. And life has a way of teaching you things, sometimes easy way or the hard way. But I have a theory that God made children, babies, helpless, so we would take care of them and protect them and hopefully love them. And then when they get to be 2 or 3 years old or 4 years old, he makes them so they can run faster than us older people can. And then when they get to be teenagers, God makes them a little obnoxious so we don't smother them. And then when they become young adults, he makes them feel as though they know everything and they can run the world, so we can't guide them unless they ask for it. And then when we get older, he messes with our brains, so many of us can't remember what we had for breakfast this morning or what we've done in our lifetime. And unless you work at trying to remember things, it's a little difficult. And even when you work at it, it's more difficult. And some people are unfortunate enough to lose a lot of their capabilities as they get older. But I'm sure I've lost more, I've forgotten more than I've ever learned, and it's probably just as well, because when God messes with our brains, it makes us unable to step in and push the young people away and tell them that they don't know what they're doing. So the young people can think their own thoughts and do their own learning and do their own directing of things in the world and come up with new ideas without being told, what do you know, you're just a kid. And that goes on daily in the world.
I think I've witnessed each one of those stages
Yes,
accurately.
yes, yes. And little people just have their own way of telling you how it is in the world. And one little boy that I knew at our local school, um, he fancied himself a naturalist. And we saw, they call them Jerusalem crickets. We call them potato bugs. And it was partially submerged in the sand under the jungle gym. And the boys were looking at it, and I told them about what he was and what he did. And he hibernates like a bear when he gets down in the sand when it's cold, and he stays safe and warm in there. And then during the day, he comes up and he eats insects. And this little boy that knows everything said, and yes, you see that hole that he came out of? He's going to go back in there, and then he'll cover it all up nice so nobody will know he's there.
How old was this boy?
5. So we'll have to do another session on kids.
Yeah.
Oh, me, yes.
I mean, you taught kids for quite some time.
Well, I was an instructional aide, and then there's another part of my life where we wanted to have a second income, but we wanted me to be able to stay home and raise our own kids, not have some babysitter who didn't really care as much about our kids as we did. We wanted the kids raised up in a normal home. And so my husband heard of this place. It was a chicken farm. And so we went and visited and all of that. And my husband said, I'll take care of the chickens in the morning before I go to work, and I'll take care of them at night. You just need to check on them in the middle of the day. Well, that sounded like a real easy job. We got our first chickens in December. It was dark when he left for work, and it was dark when he came home. So guess who learned how to be a chicken farmer? The secretary from Los Angeles. My shorthand didn't help me at all. So, but when we got our first check from the first chickens that went to the market, we had enough money to go on a trip. So then I decided that wasn't such a bad deal after all. If it was travel money, then I probably could handle it. And my second pregnancy, I went to the doctor, and the doctor checked me over, and he said, you have excellent muscle tone. What do you do that makes you so strong? And I hung my head and tried to talk softly and said, I'm a chicken farmer. And he laughed, and he said, well, don't quit. And I said, I was hoping you'd tell me I couldn't do it. No, I would have to quit. But
how many did you guys end up having?
Well, there, up the hill and on the flat land above the house, we had 2 barns. One had 4,000 chickens, and the other had 2,000. So with a total of 6,000 chickens. We did that for a number of years, and then when the aerospace industry got slow and my husband got laid off, we leased a 28,000 capacity chicken farm and another 4,000 capacity down the street a short distance. We had that many chickens, and it was a full-time job for 2 people. And it was quite a learning experience for me. And yes, it did smell bad. But the company that we raised chickens for, we started out with Rickabosh Farms, and then we got baby chicks from foster farms, and then we raised chickens for Zaki Farms. And Zaki Farms is a family company, and they were Jewish, and so they raised the chickens with higher cleanliness standards, and everything was very, very well regulated, that they would be really healthy food according to their diet restrictions or whatever. And they had a field representative that would come out once a week and answer all my questions and train me to do it by the book. And the older chicken farmers in the neighborhood were telling me, why are you doing all of this stuff? We always did it this way, and we always did it that way. And the field rep told me he was glad I didn't listen to those old geezers because I was doing it right, controlling the temperature and ventilation and all of that stuff. And I learned how to fix the automatic feeders in the barns, and I learned a lot of things, actually, but it was not my favorite job, but it brought in money, and I was able to raise my own kids, and they joined in a lot of the local activities in a little rural area in Southern California, where they had the 4-H clubs and the fair in the fall, and a lot of really nice people in the community where we were.
How long did you farm chickens?
I think 16 years. That was quite a while. And my daughter, your mother,
Mm-hmm.
loved to play with the baby chicks, but she wasn't so much in doing some of the work when she was a little kid, but she did all right when she got bigger, and she raised a lamb for the fair, and she raised one lamb, and she never wanted to raise another one because she had to turn it into a pet, and that was her pet, and it was going to be somebody's dinner.
Yeah.
And she had a horrible time with that. I had a problem with it myself, is when my sons raised pigs. If a guy came to kill the pig and haul it off, I would turn the radio up as high as I could get it and close all the windows and the doors, and I could still hear the gunshot. Oh, dear. But that's all part of life,
Yeah.
I guess. Kill or be killed. Something like that. So anyway, I've had so many good experiences and had so many kind people in my life. And we had a terrible thunderstorm. They called it a microburst. And it started about 10 miles west of where we were, and then it came and stalled right over our little community of Leona Valley on October the 15th, 2015. And my daughter called from Lancaster and said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "I'm coming out." And I said, "No, you aren't." And she said, "Why not?" And I said, "Because the road has become a river, and the concrete block wall up behind the house, a good distance, the concrete was coming down the driveway, tumbling down the driveway like they were pebbles, these big chunks of concrete." And I said, "There's no way you can get here, and it's not safe to walk out there." And she said, "What are you going to do?" I said, "I'm going to climb on the dining room table and make a few phone calls and wait until somebody comes to help." And it wasn't 20 minutes, there's a knock on the front door, a retired fireman banging on the door saying, "Ruth, are you okay?" And I said, "Yes, I was." He said, "Well, if you have any problems, you call my wife, and she has my call number, and we'll come and get you." And it washed out our driveway, and neighbors and friends and people, friends of my kids' friends, came with shovels and filled sandbags and helped put enough driveway back together to be able to get in and out of the house with the car. But that was not a fun time.
Yeah.
More hard work.
Yeah, that house was a lot of hard work.
Well, I don't think it ever hurt me, but I whined a few times. But Oh, dear.
Yeah, Joel and I put in some hours
Yeah?
out there.
Yeah? Oh, yeah.
It's good character building.
Yeah. Oh, that's how I became a character. I remember Springer when he was digging out there, and your mother had warned me Springer likes to do it Springer's way. So I made the mistake of going out there and saying, I think maybe if you dig a little bit more this way and had the water going down toward the neighbor's ditch where they are and out into the street, it might cut down a little time on this. And he said, I know what I'm doing. I know how to shovel. Oh, dear. But that's okay. Women are not supposed to know how to do things in certain circles. Oh, dear.
Until you need help.
Yeah. And your mother was really good at arm wrestling. I think she might have been the queen of the arm wrestling at Leona Valley School. Even some of the boys that thought they were pretty tough, she could usually take them on.
That's phenomenal.
Yep.
You'll have to ask her about that. I don't think I had that in my repertoire before.
Well, maybe you knew how to behave yourself at the right time.
Yeah.
Oh, my mother had a hairbrush that was round and flat on the back, and she wasn't afraid to use it. So the hairbrush meets the hind leg, hind end, whatever that part is, without using cuss words. Anyway, she knew how to use that, and my father had a razor strap, and none of you probably even know what that is, but it was like a leather belt with no fancy ends on them and no holes for making them the right size, but he knew how to wield those. And usually all of us only needed one go around with the hairbrush, or he didn't use the razor strap on the girls. And he didn't really do very much damage or anything, but it was the whole preparation and the fear of what was coming next and the lecture that went with it. It was very beneficial, no,
Effective.
efficient.
Yeah.
And our principal at the little school, you had a paddle, and in those days they could paddle kids.
That's crazy.
And somebody gave her a large paddle, and they had drilled a hole in the handle and put an electric cord in there and glued it in there, and had a short wire coming from that on a plug on the other end. And one of the boys had been sent to the office, and he looked in her office, and he saw that thing on the wall. And when he came out of the office, he was running around telling all the boys, you guys better be good, because the principal's got an electric paddle now. Oh, dear.
I think one final point before we end it, which is the typical cliche question, but do you have advice for young people on what you deem important in life, so they don't get caught up in unimportant things or focused on the wrong stuff?
Well, he had several really good sayings, but one of them was, when he was a young man, his grandpa said, I can carry a wheelbarrow load of something from here to there, and he said, I'm going to choose what goes in the wheelbarrow. And my husband said to his grandpa, I'm much stronger than you are, and you're old, and I can beat you at anything. So the grandpa drives over the wheelbarrow and tells my husband, as a young teenager, get in. That was the load that my husband couldn't carry by himself. So I learned a lot of sayings from him, and one is, you can't see the whole show from the front row. meaning you can see what goes on in the audience, and it's much more fun than just watching the show. And you can't make a grand entrance if you're the first one there. Let's see, there was one more that was a good one. Well, I'll think of it later, and I may never remember it, but just remember that I'm thinking about it. And some flimsy excuse like that. So, oh dear, now I'm going to have to make my brain work. I need some sleep.
It is getting a bit late.
Yeah. Well, this has been a pleasure. If I think of any more advice, I'll give you a call.
Oh, perfect. And I'll be able to add it on. Any parting words to the listeners?
Yes. Don't put your hand in the fire. Don't handle sharp things unless you absolutely have to. And be kind to your younger brothers and sisters, because they grow up to be adults, and sometimes people carry grudges for a long time. And when they're teenagers, they could be babysitters for you too, so
Yeah,
you never know.
I think that's fair.
Remember to smile,
Yeah.
and you can laugh at me or with me, I don't care which. As long as you laugh or smile.
Fantastic. Okay, well, I think we can end it then.
Okay, thank you very much. I think most of it's been truthful,
Yeah.
but otherwise, nobody's going to care anyway.
That's fair. That's fair.
All righty, remember to laugh and smile every chance you get.
All right, guys. Bye-bye.